On a rain-soaked highway outside Riverside, a former U.S. Marine was driving home after visiting his dying uncle. The storm hammered the asphalt, water streaking across his windshield, until he saw a patrol car sitting crooked on the shoulder. The engine was still running. Thin white steam rose from beneath the hood where rain struck overheated metal. The driver's door hung open. Inside, a female officer was slumped over the wheel, bleeding. He reached for the radio to call for help, but the voices that answered asked the wrong questions. And when backup arrived far too quickly, under flashing lights that didn't feel right, he realized this wasn't an accident. It was something far darker, and he had just stepped into the middle of it. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe one decision can change an entire city, subscribe and join us on a journey where survival becomes responsibility, and staying might cost more than walking away. Rain pressed down on Riverside, Ohio, turning the late-night highway into a ribbon of black glass where streetlights smeared into trembling halos, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Jack Turner drove with both hands steady on the wheel, his shoulders broad beneath a faded dark jacket that still carried the quiet stiffness of a uniform long retired. At 42, he had the weathered angles of a man shaped by discipline and loss, a square jaw shadowed by short, untrimmed stubble, close-cropped brown hair beginning to gray at the temples, and eyes a muted steel blue that rarely betrayed what he felt. Years in the U.S. Marine Corps had taught him control, how to swallow anger, how to keep grief from showing. But they had also carved a distance between him and the rest of the world. Tonight, that distance felt heavier than usual. He had just left the hospital where his uncle, once a city patrolman and the closest thing Jack had to a father, lay breathing shallowly beneath humming machines. The doctors had used careful words. Jack had heard the meaning anyway. In the back seat, Rex lay curled but alert. The German Shepherd was 7 years old, sable-coated with black shading along his back and warm amber eyes that missed nothing. His muzzle was flecked with early gray, and a thin scar nicked the edge of one ear, a souvenir from training days that had bonded him to Jack more tightly than most people ever could. Rex was disciplined without being cold, protective without being reckless. He rarely barked. When he did, Jack listened. They were almost past the industrial stretch, where warehouses gave way to low residential blocks, when Rex lifted his head. A low sound rolled from his chest, not a growl of threat, but of warning, the kind Jack had heard in deserts and narrow streets half a world away. Jack eased off the accelerator. His instincts answered before his thoughts did, muscles tightening, breath slowing. He scanned the shoulder of the road. A sedan sat there at an awkward angle, one tire kissing the wet gravel, the others still on asphalt. The driver's door hung open. Headlights glowed weakly through the rain. A thin thread of smoke slipped from beneath the hood and vanished into the dark. Jack felt the familiar internal argument rise up. Not my business. Keep driving. He had learned painfully that stepping in could cost you everything. He glanced at Rex in the mirror. The dog had risen to a crouch, ears forward, gaze locked on the car, body blocking the back seat as if the space itself were something to defend. All right, Jack muttered, more to himself than the dog. He pulled over several yards ahead and cut the engine. Rain drummed harder on the roof as he stepped out, the cold biting through his boots. Rex followed at heel, moving with that controlled readiness that never left him, even now. Up close, the sedan looked wrong in small ways that refused to line up as an accident. There was no crumpled hood, no spider-webbed windshield. Jack leaned in, peering through the open door, and the beam of his flashlight caught a flash of dark blue fabric and a glint of metal. A woman was slumped in the driver's seat, head tilted awkwardly, chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, soaked with blood that had turned nearly black against the rain-dark cloth. The badge on her chest, police issue, oval, unmistakable, was smeared but intact. She was young, maybe early 30s, with pale skin gone ashen and auburn hair pulled into a tight bun that had come loose at the edges. A thin line of freckles crossed the bridge of her nose. Even unconscious, there was something resolute in the set of her jaw, as if she were used to standing her ground. Jack noted the details without meaning to. Observation was an old habit, as natural as breathing. Rex moved closer, sniffing the air, then sat abruptly, eyes flicking between the trees and the open road. Jack reached into the car and felt for a pulse. It was there, weak, hurried. Relief and urgency tangled in his chest. "Hey," he said softly, though he didn't know if she could hear. "Stay with me." He reached for the radio clipped to the center console. The screen glowed, but when he keyed the mic, only static answered him. He adjusted the dial, tried again. More static. No dispatch tone, no automatic distress ping. Rainwater slicked his hands as unease crept in, cold and deliberate. Patrol cars didn't lose their emergency signal so easily. He checked again, scanning the dash for signs of impact, for anything that explained the silence. There was nothing obvious. No alarms blared, no hazard lights flashed. Just rain, smoke, and the woman bleeding out on the shoulder of an empty road. Behind him, Rex stiffened, a soft sound escaping his throat. Jack straightened slowly, eyes moving back to the radio, to the quiet that felt suddenly loud. He didn't know yet what had happened here, only that something had gone very wrong, and that this car, with its silent radio and open door, was not asking for help the way it should have been. Jack Turner knelt beside the open driver's door while rain slid down the back of his neck and pooled at the seams of the asphalt. He forced his breathing to slow, the way he had been taught years ago, back when panic was a liability and hesitation could kill. The woman in the seat, Officer Emily Carter, he could now read on the name strip stitched above her chest, was alive, but barely. Up close, she looked younger than he had first thought, early 30s at most, with a lean build and the kind of wiry strength that came from long shifts and too little rest. Her auburn hair, usually disciplined into a regulation bun, had loosened into damp strands that clung to her pale cheeks. Freckles dusted her skin lightly, a detail that felt almost out of place against the blood and torn fabric. Even unconscious, her face carried a stubborn set, as if yielding had never come easily to her. Jack slid 2 fingers along her neck, counting the pulse with quiet precision. Fast. Shallow. He shifted the flashlight beam and studied the wound at her shoulder. The tear in the uniform was clean, almost too clean, not jagged like something ripped by metal in a crash. The blood seeped steadily, dark against the blue fabric, but there was no swelling consistent with blunt force. His jaw tightened. Training never really left a man. It waited patiently until needed. This wasn't the pattern of a car accident. Behind him, Rex paced once, then settled into a sit facing the tree line. The dog's posture was alert but controlled, head high, ears forward, tail still. At 7 years old, Rex had learned the difference between chaos and threat. Jack trusted that judgment more than his own instincts sometimes. "Watch," Jack murmured. Rex didn't look back, but the message was received. Jack shrugged out of his jacket, the fabric heavy with rain and old memories. It was a practical garment, faded brown, reinforced at the elbows, the kind of thing a man wore when he didn't care to be noticed. He tore it into long strips with efficient movements and pressed one firmly against the wound, adjusting the pressure until Emily's breathing steadied just enough to matter. His hands moved without flourish. He had done this before, too many times, often in places where there were no sirens coming. Emily stirred, a faint sound escaping her throat. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of wet slate, unfocused but sharp with instinct even through pain. She tried to move and winced, teeth clenching. Jack leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Easy. You're hurt. Don't move." His tone was calm, almost gentle, the same voice he had used on frightened civilians overseas, on young Marines who hadn't yet learned how fear worked. Her gaze fixed on his face, then flicked past him to Rex, who had turned just enough to let her see his silhouette. Something like recognition passed over her features. Her lips trembled, shaping words that barely carried over the rain. Don't trust them. The effort cost her. Her eyes slid shut again, her head lolling to the side. Jack stayed still for a beat, absorbing it. Don't trust them. Not, don't leave me. Not, call for help. His mind cataloged the warning without yet assigning it meaning. He tightened the bandage slightly, watching for signs of shock, then glanced back into the car. That was when he noticed the driver's seat more carefully. The upholstery bore a small, ugly mark near the left side, a shallow crater edged with scorched fabric. Jack leaned in, running his light over it. It wasn't a tear from debris. It wasn't crushed foam from impact. It was something else. Something hard, fast, and hot had struck there. His stomach sank. He straightened slowly, eyes moving to the doorframe, the dash, the windshield. No airbag deployment, no spidering glass. The car hadn't taken a hit the way it should have if it had left the road at speed. Rex let out a low sound, barely audible, and shifted his stance. Jack followed the dog's line of sight, scanning the darkness beyond the shoulder. Nothing moved. The highway remained empty, the city distant and indifferent. Still, the feeling persisted, a prickle between his shoulders that told him this place was not safe in the way an accident scene might be. Jack wiped rain from his face with the back of his hand and looked down at Emily again. Her breathing hitched, then steadied under the pressure of the makeshift bandage. She was tough. He could see it in the way her body fought to stay present, in the tension that never fully left her limbs, even unconscious. Whatever had happened to her, it hadn't been chance. He didn't say it aloud, not even to himself, but the conclusion settled quietly in his mind. This was violence, not misfortune. The wound, the silent radio, the mark in the seat. All of it pointed in the same direction. Jack wasn't ready to name it yet. Naming things had a way of changing what came next. For now, he focused on what he could control. Keep her alive, stay alert, and wait for answers that would arrive whether he wanted them or not. The rain kept falling. Rex held his watch. And Jack Turner, long removed from uniforms and orders, found that the habits forged in another life were once again the only things standing between order and something far worse. The rain had settled into a steady, patient fall, no longer sharp but heavy, as if the night itself were waiting. Jack Turner stayed low beside the sedan, one knee pressed into the wet gravel, his back angled to shield the wounded officer from the road. Years away from the Marines had softened his routines, but not erased them. When the situation turned uncertain, his body remembered before his mind caught up. He reached for the handheld radio he kept in the side compartment of his truck. It was older than most modern police units, its casing scratched, the antenna taped twice where it had once bent in a hard fall. Jack had bought it after leaving the Corps, back when he still believed preparedness could replace control. He rolled the dial slowly, listening past static and distant chatter until a narrow band locked in. The tone was unmistakable. Law enforcement frequency. "Officer down," Jack said when he pressed the button, his voice calm, deliberately unhurried. "Highway shoulder, female officer, severe bleeding." The reply came almost immediately, too quickly. "Identify yourself," the man said. The voice was steady, practiced, the kind that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. Middle-aged, Jack guessed, no accent, no strain. Jack waited a half-second, expecting the follow-up that never came. No request for condition, no question about consciousness. Just silence, expectant. "Civilian rendering aid," Jack answered. "What's your response time?" There was a pause, brief but noticeable. Rex, standing several feet behind him, stiffened. The German shepherd's ears angled forward, his low growl barely audible under the rain. Jack didn't turn. He trusted the dog's instincts the way he trusted gravity. "Confirm your location," the voice said. Jack gave the mile marker and nearest intersection, then tried again. "She's losing blood. Shoulder wound. I've applied pressure." Static crackled, then the voice returned, unchanged. "Remain at your position." That was it. Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. He had worked alongside medics, MPS, and civilian responders in places where seconds mattered. There was a rhythm to real emergency communication, a triage of words, a rush to understand the patient before the scene. This was not that rhythm. This was containment. He glanced down at the woman in the car. Officer Emily Carter lay slumped, her breathing shallow but steady beneath the makeshift bandage. Her face was pale, freckles standing out sharply against her skin, auburn hair plastered to her temple. She looked like someone who ran on stubbornness when strength failed. Jack had known people like that. They rarely asked for help unless they had no choice. He keyed the radio again. "Which unit is responding?" The answer came instantly. "Multiple units." Rex growled louder now, stepping closer, his body angled toward the darkness beyond the curve of the road. Jack finally turned his head slightly, scanning the highway behind them. Nothing yet. Just rain, slick pavement, and the faint glow of distant streetlights. Jack released the transmit button and stared at the radio in his hand. The man on the other end hadn't asked if Emily was conscious, hadn't asked her badge number, hadn't asked anything that would help keep her alive. Instead, every question had circled back to Jack himself, his identity, his location, his compliance. He shut the radio off. Emily stirred then, a soft sound catching in her throat. Jack leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're okay," he said, though he wasn't sure it was true. "Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open briefly, gray-blue and unfocused. She tried to speak, failed, then whispered with effort, "They're not here to help." Her head fell back against the seat, the words spent. Jack straightened slowly, rain dripping from his hairline. He didn't need more explanation. The radio exchange had already confirmed what her warning suggested. Whoever controlled that channel cared less about the officer bleeding on the roadside than about the man kneeling beside her. Behind him, Rex's stance hardened, muscles coiled, tail rigid. Headlights appeared far down the road, faint but growing brighter, reflecting off the wet asphalt in long, white streaks. Jack rose to his feet, positioning himself between Emily and the approaching lights. His hands remained visible, empty, his posture open but ready. He felt the shift complete inside him, the quiet acceptance that came when a situation crossed an invisible line. The training hadn't left because it had never been a skill. It was a way of thinking, and the questions he'd been asked tonight were the wrong ones. The headlights grew brighter far faster than Jack expected, washing the rain-slicked shoulder in white glare and long, nervous shadows. 2 cruisers appeared first, then a third, their approach tight and deliberate, tires hissing as they pulled in behind the disabled sedan. Jack kept his stance open, feet planted, hands visible at his sides. Rex stood just behind his left leg, body angled protectively, amber eyes fixed on the arriving vehicles. The dog's growl deepened, not loud, not frantic, but unmistakably serious. The first officer out of the lead car was a tall man with a rigid posture and a clean-shaven face that looked carved rather than aged. He moved with efficiency, rain beating on his uniform, eyes flicking not to the wounded woman, but to Jack's hands. The second officer followed more slowly, broader through the shoulders, beard trimmed close, jaw tight as if clenched by habit. Both men carried themselves with authority, but something in their approach felt off, like actors hitting marks without listening to the scene. "Step back," the tall officer said, voice sharp. "Hands where I can see them." Jack complied without protest, easing one step away from Emily while keeping his body angled to shield her from the road. A third car rolled to a stop slightly apart from the others. Rex's reaction changed immediately. His ears flattened, hackles lifting, weight shifting forward with a warning intensity Jack hadn't seen since training exercises designed to separate real threat from noise. Jack followed Rex's focus to that third cruiser. In the wash of headlights and rain, it looked almost right. Same color, same general shape, but not entirely. The reflective unit markings that usually caught light along the doors were absent. The hood-mounted camera housing, standard issue for the department Jack's uncle had once served, was missing, leaving a smooth, unbroken line of metal where equipment should have been. The bearded officer glanced at the sedan and then at Jack again. "What happened here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly interested in the answer. Jack opened his mouth to respond when the tall officer cut in. "We've got it from here." No radio check, no call for EMS. No one moved to assess Emily's airway or vitals. Jack felt the cold certainty settle deeper. This wasn't sloppy. It was intentional. "Officer down," Jack said evenly, forcing the words into the open. "She needs medical." The tall officer's eyes flicked to Emily for the first time, then away just as quickly. "Ambulance is en route," he said, a statement rather than a reassurance. Rex growled louder, a sound that drew the bearded officer's attention. His hand drifted closer to his holster, not in panic, but with the casual readiness of someone used to compliance. Jack raised his palms a fraction higher, a silent signal to Rex to hold. From the third cruiser stepped a woman who hadn't been there a moment before, or at least hadn't been visible. She was shorter, compact, her dark hair pulled into a severe ponytail that didn't move when she did. Her skin was olive-toned, her expression unreadable, eyes scanning Jack with professional detachment. She carried herself with a clipped efficiency that suggested long hours and little patience. She didn't look at Emily at all. "Name?" she said to Jack. "Now?" Jack gave it. She nodded once, already turning away, speaking quietly into her shoulder mic, though Jack noticed the light on the mic never activated. Rain thickened, drumming on metal, and still no one knelt beside the wounded officer. Jack's gaze moved from face to face, cataloging details the way training demanded. Gloves stayed dry, flashlights stayed off, procedures were skipped. He felt the tension in Rex's frame like a drawn wire. The dog's focus never left the third cruiser. The tall officer stepped closer, invading Jack's space by inches. "We told you to step back," he said. Jack didn't move. He met the man's eyes calmly. "She's bleeding through," he replied. "Pressure needs adjusting." The officer's jaw flexed. For a split second, something like irritation crossed his face. Not concern, not urgency. Irritation at being challenged. That was when Jack understood fully. Help wasn't late. It was selective. A distant siren wailed somewhere far off, thin and delayed, a sound that belonged to a different response entirely. The bearded officer shifted his weight, blocking Jack's line of sight to Emily. Rex took one step forward, silent but unmistakable. The woman by the third cruiser watched the dog with new interest, calculating. Jack felt the moment stretch, fragile as glass. He had learned long ago that danger often arrived wearing familiar uniforms, that authority could be misused as easily as it could protect. He inhaled, steadying himself, and let the conclusion settle without panic. Not every badge on this road had come to save a life. The moment cracked open, not with a shout, but with a sound Jack Turner knew too well. The faint, precise click of a retention strap coming free. Rain blurred the edges of everything, yet his focus sharpened. One of the men, standing half a step behind the tall, clean-shaven officer, had drawn his weapon low, muzzle angled toward Jack's center mass, not raised, not dramatic, just ready. It was the posture of someone trained to shoot without warning. Jack did not move. His hands stayed visible, palms open, shoulders loose. Years ago, in another life, he had learned that stillness could be louder than defiance. The man with the gun was younger than the others, early 30s perhaps, lean with narrow shoulders and a face too smooth for the hardness in his eyes. His hair was cropped short, regulation neat, but his jaw twitched as if held tight by anger he didn't fully control. There was something brittle about him, a man who followed orders because he didn't trust himself to choose. "On the ground," he said, voice thin, eyes locked on Jack's chest. The tall officer did not stop him. The bearded one shifted to block the road, cutting off sight lines. The woman by the third cruiser watched silently, weight on one hip, calculating. Jack inhaled slowly. He did not argue. He did not comply. He spoke evenly, projecting calm. "She's bleeding out," he said. "Lower the weapon. Let me adjust the pressure." The gun did not move. Rain ran down the barrel, dripping off the front sight like a ticking clock. Rex felt the shift before Jack finished speaking. The German shepherd's body tightened, muscles bunching beneath his thick coat, amber eyes burning with intent. He did not bark. He waited. The young officer's finger curled. Not fully. Enough. Jack's instincts surged, not the urge to strike, but to protect. He stepped half a pace sideways, placing his body between the muzzle and Emily's slumped form. The movement was subtle, deliberate. The woman by the cruiser stiffened. "Don't," she warned, too late. Rex moved. It happened fast and without chaos. Rex launched forward in a clean arc, jaws closing on the gunman's forearm just above the wrist, clamping down and twisting with trained precision. The weapon clattered to the pavement, skidding under a cruiser. The man shouted in shock, stumbling back as Rex drove him down, weight centered, teeth locked without tearing. Jack moved at the same instant, not striking but intercepting, catching the man's shoulder and guiding him to the ground, knee pressing between shoulder blades to pin without crushing. The bearded officer reached for his sidearm, hesitated as Rex's growl deepened, then froze. The tall officer swore under his breath. The woman took a step back, hand finally lifting toward her radio, still dark. "Don't," Jack said again, louder now, authority edging into his voice despite himself. "Stand down." He felt the old calm settle, the clarity that came when choices narrowed. Rex held steady, eyes flicking to Jack for confirmation. Jack gave a small nod. The dog loosened his grip just enough to maintain control without breaking skin. A sound cut through the rain, ragged, breathless. Emily Carter stirred. Her eyes opened wider this time, pain etched deep, but awareness burning through it. Her hand groped weakly at her chest, fingers brushing the small black rectangle clipped to her vest. The body camera. Jack saw the recognition flash across her face. "Cam," she whispered, voice hoarse. "Please." Jack shifted, careful not to release pressure, and nodded. "Do it." With effort that cost her a grimace, Emily pressed the activation button. A soft tone chirped. The tiny red light blinked alive. Everything changed in that instant. The tall officer's expression tightened. The woman's eyes snapped to the camera, then to Jack, anger flickering through her control. "Turn that off," she snapped, finally urgency breaking through. Emily swallowed, forcing the words out between shallow breaths. "No." The camera's lens stared unblinking, rain speckling its surface. The audio captured it all, the gun drawn, the command, the struggle, the sudden silence. Emily drew in a breath and spoke, each word deliberate. "If you're watching this," she said, voice shaking but clear, "they tried to kill me." The young gunman struggled weakly beneath Rex, fear replacing aggression. Emily continued, eyes on Jack now, then flicking to the camera. "I was following an internal trail. Missing weapons. Department inventory diverted and sold. I had names." She coughed, blood darkening the bandage. "They intercepted me before I could file." Her gaze cut to the woman by the cruiser. "You were supposed to clean it up."
The woman's face hardened, mask slipping. The tall officer took a step back, calculating escape routes that no longer existed. Sirens rose in the distance, real this time, layered and urgent, growing closer by the second. Jack felt the shift ripple through the scene as inevitability took hold. He kept his knee firm, his voice steady. "Rex," he said softly. The dog held. Emily exhaled, relief and pain tangling. "You ruined their timing," she told Jack faintly. "That's why they're here." Jack met her gaze, something like resolve passing between them. He hadn't come looking for this.
But instinct had carried him here. The same instinct that had once carried him through worse. And now, with the camera blinking red, there was no turning back. The real sirens arrived, layered and unmistakable, cutting through the rain with an authority that could not be faked. Red and blue washed the highway in pulses, as black SUVs slid in behind the cruisers, doors opening in synchronized restraint. The scene changed temperature instantly. The officers who had come too fast, who had asked the wrong questions, stepped back as if the ground itself had shifted. Jack Turner felt it in his chest, the moment when improvisation ended and procedure finally caught up. Men and women moved with practiced calm. One knelt beside Emily Carter, gloved hands efficient, voice low and steady as oxygen hissed and a pressure dressing replaced Jack's torn jacket. Another collected the fallen weapon without comment. Rex was eased back with a soft word and a palm to his chest. The dog complied, breathing hard, eyes never leaving Jack. The FBI agents identified themselves without drama. The lead agent was a woman in her late 40s named Laura Hensley, tall and straight-backed, with iron-gray hair cut to the jaw and a face that looked carved by long hours and difficult decisions. Her eyes were cool, observant, and kind in a way that came from competence rather than softness. She listened first. She always did. Emily's body cam was secured and sealed with meticulous care. Hensley watched the playback on a tablet beneath the open tailgate of an SUV, rain streaking the screen. She did not interrupt. When the footage ended, she nodded once, a small motion that carried weight. "That's enough," she said. "We've got probable cause." Orders rippled outward. The questionable officers were separated without confrontation, hands visible, voices clipped. The woman with the severe ponytail said nothing. Her eyes hardened, then dulled, as if a door had closed. Jack was guided aside, not shoved, not accused. A young agent draped a dry jacket over his shoulders. "You're not under arrest," the agent said, earnest and careful. "We're placing you in protective custody as a witness." Jack nodded. The phrasing mattered. He'd learned to listen to it. Rex was led to sit at his knee, the dog's damp coat steaming faintly in the cold air. Age 7, but still solid and disciplined. A quiet presence anchoring Jack to the moment. Emily was loaded into the ambulance. As the doors closed, she caught Jack's eye. Relief crossed her face. Then resolve. The ambulance pulled away, lights vanishing into the curve, leaving the rain to fill the space it took with it. Hensley approached Jack beneath the SUV's raised hatch. Up close, her lines were clearer, faint crow's feet earned rather than cosmetic, a scar near the eyebrow that suggested an old lesson learned the hard way. "Mr. Turner," she said, offering her hand. Her grip was firm, unperformative. "Thank you for staying." Jack inclined his head. She needed help. Hensley studied him for a beat, then glanced at Rex. "He's trained," she said, not a question. "Former canine support," Jack replied. "Marine unit." The agent nodded, filing it away. "That explains the restraint." She gestured to a bench in the SUV. "Sit. Warm up." As Jack complied, another agent passed him a cup of coffee. Steam curled up, smelling faintly burnt and welcome. They waited while logistics settled. Evidence was logged, statements were taken. Hensley returned with a tablet and a softer tone. "We verified the body cam," she said. "Your account matches. You intervened lawfully.
Jack listened, the words washing over him. He hadn't intervened for legality. He had intervened because he couldn't not. Hensley hesitated, then asked a question that wasn't on her list. "You came from the hospital tonight," she said. "Who did you visit?" Jack stiffened, just a fraction. "My uncle," he answered. "Frank Turner." The name hung in the air. Hensley's eyes flicked to the tablet, then back to Jack.
Something changed in her posture. Not suspicion, but recognition. "Franklin Turner?" she asked. "Former patrol sergeant, Riverside PD. Retired under pressure." Jack's coffee paused halfway to his mouth. He nodded slowly. "He was forced out," Jack said. "Years ago. For asking questions he was told not to ask." The rain softened to a steady hush around them. Hensley exhaled through her nose, a sound like a door opening. "He filed a memo," she said quietly. "Inventory discrepancies. Weapons that walked off paper and into nowhere. The memo died in a drawer. He didn't." She met Jack's eyes. "Your uncle was one of the first to pull the thread Emily picked up." The weight of it settled, heavy and precise. Jack thought of the hospital room, the machines, the careful words. He thought of the silence Frank had carried home for years. "So this is why," Jack said, not quite a question. Hensley nodded. "They tried to bury it twice," she said. "Tonight didn't go their way." She glanced at Rex, who leaned into Jack's leg. "Timing matters," she added. "So do people who stay." Jack looked down at his hands, scarred and steady, and then back up. "You never stopped being a cop," Jack said. "He just stopped wearing the badge." Hensley's expression softened. "Neither did Emily," she said. "Neither did you." They sat in the rain-lit quiet as the last of the questionable cruisers were towed away. Jack finished his coffee. Rex rested his chin on Jack's knee. The city breathed again. The truth had a name now, and it had reached back through a hospital corridor to find him. He hadn't planned to be part of it, but some names, once spoken, refused to be ignored. Morning arrived quietly in Riverside, the rain finally spent, leaving the streets rinsed and reflective, as if the city itself had decided to tell the truth. Jack Turner stood at the edge of the hospital parking lot with Rex at his side, the smell of wet concrete and brewed coffee drifting from an open service door. The night had stretched him thin, but he felt steadier now, a calm earned rather than borrowed. He watched the automatic doors slide open and closed, counting the rhythm the way he once counted breaths. Emily Carter survived the surgery. The words had been delivered without ceremony by a nurse whose face showed the practiced gentleness of someone who had learned to keep hope precise. Emily was critical but stable. The bleeding had been stopped in time. Jack let the sentence land and stay. He didn't cheer. He didn't exhale dramatically. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging a fact that had always been waiting to be true. Rex pressed his shoulder into Jack's thigh, 7 years old and solid, his amber eyes softening at last. By late morning, the fallout moved with purpose. Offices were sealed, lockers inventoried, and names, some familiar, some whispered, were lifted into the open and handled by people who knew how to hold them. The internal ring unraveled without fireworks, thread by thread. Because evidence doesn't need drama when it has time. Jack watched from a distance, declining the polite offers to sit in front of a camera. He had learned, painfully, how easily stories drift from the truth once they leave the mouth. When a reporter approached with a microphone and a practiced smile, Jack answered with the same calm he'd used all night. "I'm not the story," he said. "She is." The smile faltered. The microphone lowered. In a small conference room off the lobby, a quiet gathering formed instead. No banners, no applause that asked for more. A senior officer, older than Jack, stooped but unbowed, stood at the front. His name was Samuel Ortega, a man whose years had carved patience into his face.
His hair was white and kept short, his mustache neatly trimmed, his uniform worn like a promise rather than a costume. He spoke plainly. "We honor restraint," he said. "We honor staying." He gestured to Rex.
The collar came first, leather brown and new. The metal tag cool and modest, engraved with a simple designation that carried weight without spectacle. Rex accepted it with the same dignity he had shown on the road, tail wagging once, then stilling, as if he understood that quiet moments mattered more. Jack knelt to fasten the buckle. His hands were steady. When he stood, Ortega met his eyes and said the words that would stay. "There are Marines," he said, voice roughened by memory, "who never leave the mission. They just change how they serve." Emily asked to see Jack later that afternoon. He washed his hands, smoothed his jacket, and entered the room without ceremony. She looked smaller beneath the blankets, freckles standing out against skin still pale, auburn hair braided loosely now, a concession to comfort rather than regulation. Her eyes were clear. "You stayed," she said, not accusing, not grateful, simply naming a fact. Jack nodded. Rex approached the bed carefully and rested his chin near her hand. Emily smiled, then winced, then smiled again. "Tell him thank you," she said. Jack did. Rex accepted the gratitude with a sigh. They didn't talk about the case. They talked about ordinary things, how the river smells at dawn, how dogs know when to wait, how quiet can be a form of courage. When Jack stood to leave, Emily said, "If they ask you again?" Jack shook his head gently. "They won't," he said. "And if they do, I'll say the same thing." She closed her eyes, satisfied. By evening, the city loosened its shoulders. Jack packed his truck while the sun dipped low, staining the river copper and blue. He took one last look at the hospital doors, then turned the key. As he pulled onto the road, the light caught Rex's new tag and flashed once, bright and brief. The dog settled into the seat and watched the city pass, ears lifting at familiar sounds, head tilting toward a future that didn't ask for applause. They drove east as the sky cooled, the buildings thinning into trees. Jack didn't feel the need to rush. He thought of his uncle in the quiet room, of Emily breathing on her own, of a city that had been steadied not by force, but by refusal. The road opened. The truck rolled on. Sometimes, Jack knew, the person who saves a place isn't the one who storms in. It's the one who doesn't turn away and stays long enough to matter. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes they arrive as a choice not to look away, a choice to stay when fear whispers, "Leave." In moments like these, many believe it is not coincidence, but God's quiet hand at work, placing the right soul in the right place, turning ordinary obedience into extraordinary grace. In our daily lives, we may never pull someone from a burning car, but we are given smaller chances every day to listen, to help, to stand for what is right when no one is watching. Those moments matter more than we know. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from or how faith has shown up in your life. Subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach hearts that need them. May God bless you, protect you, and remind you that even in the darkest nights, He is still working through willing hands.